Good day, everyone across North America. This is John Garmendi with Sony's Professional Solutions of America, welcoming you back to another in our series of Tech Tuesday webinars. The B2B team took a brief hiatus from these webinar series while we were out meeting with many of you at our AV roadshows in Boston, New York, Tampa, and Dallas. And we look forward to meeting many more of you at our upcoming Phoenix stop on the 16th and 17th of February. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who have been attending since early 2020, we'd like to welcome you back. We developed these webinars so that our customers, resellers, integrators, and consultants can stay informed and up to date on Sony's latest products and solutions, especially during this time when many of us can't meet in person. Today's webinar, the first in a three-part series, is entitled, What is a Learning Experience? Where you'll learn how to make hybrid and online learning lessons more engaging, utilizing Sony's innovative, easy-to-use technology to turn any classroom or lecture hall into a flexible, remote-ready teaching space. Before we start, a few items of housekeeping. As in all of our webinars, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A. So please submit your questions via the in-event meeting questions panel. We'll post links to the information referred to during this webinar in the chat panel, and we'll also post a link to our YouTube playlist where you can view all of our archived Tech Tuesday webinars. Joining me today will be Chrissy Sarah, Senior Sales Support Engineer for the Central Zone here with Sony. I'll turn it over to Chrissy now and join you back here later for Q&A.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to speak with you today, and I am looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have about what is a teaching educational experience. What are we even going to think about when we consider something of that term? So let's dive in. We've already talked a little bit about who I am and what I do for Sony. I'm pretty excited to have the role that I have, and I get to explore client sites with lots of different needs. And one particular vertical that I'm pretty passionate about is the educational space, as myself is also a teacher in multiple forms, not just in education and technical education, but also on a personal side of teaching people how to ride horses. So I get a lot of different experiences being able to teach people and then therefore also see how a student then learns. So our first point of conversation today is going to be what is our number one goal when we're considering the definition behind what a learning experience is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about learning and teaching styles. Then I'm also going to talk about some of those common misconceptions, which I hear a lot, either on the road or in conversation around internal, staff that is hearing things come from their sides of the country. What the end goal of our needs analysis is in finding a solution for our higher education installations. The best, better, good concept that I would like to say that I coined, but I probably didn't. So I'm just going to go with the concept. And then psychological effects of doing it right and doing it wrong. So let's dive into what our number one goal is, and that is education. So in general, regardless of how or when you're considering conversation around outfitting your higher education space, what is our actual goal of the space? Yeah, it's a room. Yes, there's technology, but what is our actual point? So our theme of the day is to discuss how to make hybrid and online learning lessons more engaging, right? By supporting teachers and enabling better student outcomes. And again, before we can do this, we have to access the need. So educating a person is the takeaway. Yet how do we actually do that is really up to the viewer. So we kind of have to put ourselves in a couple different places mentally to think about what the best option is and what the best takeaway is. So it's one thing to say to our customers, our education customers, here's what we offer, do with it what you wish. Like, oh, you want to put 150 projectors in your university? Great. Here's 150 projectors. Well, why do they want to use a projector in that space? And let's build out what their actual needs are for that space. It's better always to approach that conversation with, we understand what your style needs are, and here's what we have to offer to support that, right? So it's a little bit different than just pushing the product out the door. Another way that we could look at this is in an educational space, right? If you place yourself, and I'm going to reference this analogy a lot, if you place yourself in mentally where you need to be to learn something, right? For instance, I was learning something from my niece the other day, and she's 18 months old, and she figured out how to organize the toys a certain way, and she wanted to show me, and I had to kind of place myself in a learning mentality for her to show me. Now, of course, she says all of 4 words, but I had to really place myself in a different mindset to accept what she was saying. So let's go to a higher ed experience, or say a science class where you have students who need to learn how much liquid needs to go into a certain beaker. Is the best way to show them that a PowerPoint slide with a beaker and a measuring cup and liquid in a picture? Maybe a better way to teach them that is to actually have their hands holding a beaker that's full of liquid and pouring that liquid physically into another measuring container, right? So that's more of a kinesthetic type of learning. So maybe that's a better option for that particular environment. All in all, to better understand how we can help our clients accomplish the now inevitable hybrid scenarios, it's first to look at their actual training ground. So what are we looking at, right? What are we saying and hearing from our teachers and from our students? And that's right. Our students obtain information one way. Our teachers then teach that one way. And then our content might actually need a different way. Going back to that beaker, right? Maybe PowerPoint isn't going to get that message across. So for those who have been in a higher education AV management environment, we all know that we're providing the technology, but the technology used in the classroom is just an agent to help accomplish the tasks of learning and delivering a message. So what then is the actual need, right? The need is challenge to share knowledge, discuss discoveries, and in the ways that students and teachers both understand. So now we're thinking more of a environment where we're having people share knowledge. We're also having them challenge each other. We're also having them discuss discoveries of now this newfound knowledge. I remember a teacher back in my day who would use the chalkboard as her only way of delivering class material. And this was back in New York, and I was a little kid, and that meant that I had to take notes, and I had to take good notes. And back then, I might not have actually known how to take good notes, right? I learned that method way later. But if I wanted to actually go home with a lesson, I had to write the note down from the chalkboard to my paper. Well, the big problem with that is I didn't have glasses yet, and so I couldn't see the board. And so what I had to do was adapt my learning style to obtain the information. So, for instance, there are 3 to 4 learning styles. There's kinesthetic, there's audible, there's visual, and then there's a hybrid or ambidextrous version. So my natural form of learning is kinesthetic and visual. So I like to be able to show you the thing. I like to be able to hear you tell it to me 3 to 4 times while you're actually drawing it on the board. So I really take in a lot of the learning methods. So I would say I'm even more of a hybrid. But when I'm going back to that Blackboard experience, I had to turn off my visual and kinesthetic natural learning methods to take in the teachers what the environment was creating, which was an audible learning experience because I couldn't see the board. So hopefully that's a little, hopefully that is making a little bit more sense now that we're talking about how as a student, I have methods of learning, and that teacher, though she was technically writing it on the board, she still was the space and the technology in the space was actually making it an impediment on myself to be able to take away the message at the end of the day, which who knows what I was learning back in fourth grade, but it definitely had a bit of an issue getting into my brain. So one thing I wanted to move into is not only do we have methods where there's learning methods and then there's teaching methods, but we want to keep in mind that we move into that example as well as levels. And before we jump into that, I want to really hone in this point, and then we'll switch on to the next slide. Your client is not just the instructor, right? But it's also the student, and in some cases, it's the content. So whatever that lesson was that my fourth grade teacher was trying to show me, that required something more than just writing it on a chalkboard. So instructors have all different styles, as do students. And then you have the students who mix up with the different teaching styles and then mix up with the different receiving styles. So you have to understand, the takeaway from this point is that you have to understand the audience and what they need to accomplish their goals is really the focus. It's not necessarily all about speccing gear, right? Let's see what kind of gear we can get in there fast. Well, let's see what they actually need first. So the instructor's job maybe is to handle the above, right? But our AV technology in the room is to help that teacher meet their goals and help those students walk away with a positive learning experience. So to make things even more interesting, that's where I want to add in our levels of learning. So levels of learning and levels of teaching are very key. And hopefully most of you have actually seen this before. It would not surprise me at all. And the credit here goes to Bloom's taxonomy. I can never say that word. I've been in this industry for how many long, and I still can't say that word. So if you've never heard of this before, it's worth Googling. There's lots of information about this. It's a psychological theory that has been everywhere. But how does that translate to us as AV tech people, right? So we've heard of 101 courses, we've heard of 102 courses, like Math 101, Math 102, Math 103, etc. The reason for this is this, right? So there are 6 stages to learning something new. That is remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and then create. So for teachers, creating a lesson plan, it's recommended that they create kind of a hybrid version where they actually take, remember, and understand in their first part of their lesson, and then apply and analyze is in their second part of their lesson, and evaluate and create is in their third. So so that's actually kind of why we're doing a 3-part series here, because I'm giving you the tools for the information to remember and understand the direction we're going. And then our next webinar is going to be applying the technology and the knowledge that we learned in this webinar. And then the last webinar is going to be how we're going to evaluate those 2 plans together and then create the solution for our client, right? So I'm actually kind of doing what I'm teaching, which is kind of cool. So kudos to Jean, who put this on, for making that happen. So let's think about something for a second. What does it mean for us AV people? What does all of this mean? It means that not one solution can fit every educational space, which I could just end the webinar there and you guys would be like, yeah, you're right. Or you might be like, I have experienced this before and I can't just buy 150 projectors and throw them in all the rooms because it's not going to fit all the needs of those particular classrooms. So before I move on, I want to bring up an example. And I was actually kind of giggling last night thinking about this example because I forgot that I experienced this in life because I've been so in the evaluation and creation stage of this particular topic, I forgot that I once didn't know how to drive a car. All right. So imagine, and what I'm explaining here is the stages of learning. Driving a car. So the very first time you get into a car, you sit in the driver's seat, you're a 10-year-old kid, 10 to 15-year-old kid, and you see the steering wheel and you see the gas pedal and you see the keys, you see the gear shift, and you're like, this is going to be amazing. But you don't actually know yet what those do and how they relate to the car, right? So somebody has to first tell you what that is, or you have to observe it for yourself. and then you're shown that information. You remember that you have to put the key in the car, turn it, and then you can press the gas to move forward. But what would happen if I just left that day and never returned to the car? Well, I gained the knowledge and maybe remember some parts, but I didn't understand how the car on the road applies to other cars on the road, or if pressing the gas pedal and then the brake at the same time is bad. So the next level would be learning that there is more to driving the car than just how it works, which is that understanding apply, right? So then understanding that I would need to actually put those knowledge pieces together and apply them, I then can analyze how I'm doing that. So I apply the knowledge, I then remember and understand, and as days go on of applying and analyzing, I evaluate my method of driving. And now, after however how many years of driving I've been doing, I've created my own way of driving. So apply that to each element of your university. You have different areas of education, right? Business, science. In my industry, had a theater production area, or my university had a theater environment. Regardless, the idea of learning those takeaways is still a methodology that can be understood, and that is through these levels of learning and teaching. So that provides us the background for the takeaway, which is people enter an education space to be informed, challenged, and tested. People also enter an education space to inform, to challenge, and to test. So it's important to understand why we are in this market and why we are actually wanting to create spaces that allow these people to do their goal. And now we have the hybrid, flex, flip, all these different types of education spaces that need to take place. And what are they actually doing? Well, we are referencing how we can provide our clients, the students and the teachers, the tools to do what they are there to do, which is to inform, challenge, and test. I hope that makes sense. If you're familiar with this path that I'm going, that means that you have conducted a needs analysis before in your platform. And now we understand that there is more to education spaces than just throwing up projectors and cameras pointed in the front of the room, and that our number one goal should always be education. So now that we have our need written for this, what is the activities that will support our goal? Let's move on. So the first thing I want to hit before we get to goal number 2 is a lot of misconceptions that come up when in conversation with different technical people or AV management people or some of the purse holders that are involved in your, what do you call it? I forget the name of the fancy people in the university that are the purse string holders. So those people, sometimes they come to you and say, I'm so tired of projection, I want it out. It's outdated, we don't need it. What's the latest and greatest, right? Or what if they say something like, well, we can't have the best. If we can't have the best, we might as well just piecemeal the existing. How many times have you guys heard that? Or maybe you've heard the misconception of teachers just teach and they don't really care how their students receive it. I have had a few of those in my past, but that's not the general consensus. Students aren't interested in half or of what they're learning, so we can cut the corners. And then I would love for everyone listening to add in a few misconceptions that they have heard before, so I can not only add to my list, but also hear from you more ideas of what some of the misconceptions are, that when you're in this planning phase with your your education people, what they're actually thinking, like what barriers are we needing to break down for them to understand that we're there for them. So let's look at number 1 for right now. Yes, there is the age-old debate that if we should keep projection in the education space. I have plenty of thoughts on this topic. This is not the webinar for that. We could all talk for hours about that. But what I want to point out is that projection works, right? Every single one of you still sees outdated equipment being used. So even if we dare say that projection is outdated, which I disagree with, or whichever side of the argument you're particularly on, what works for goal number one. What works for goal number one, right? What are we doing here? Is it projection? If it works, great. Use it, right? So let's just not throw the cat out with the bathwater, right? We want to consider projection still. We want to also keep in mind the goal is to meet goal number one, not just sell a bunch of projectors, and it's not just to appease the misconception that we need to update to something else just because we can. Okay, so number two then is, in my opinion, a non-starter. I feel bad. I want to give that person a hug, whoever thinks that way, just because it's kind of sad. If we can't have the best, then why do we even try in the first place? Let's just throw that out, right? You don't have to get the Ferrari right away. You can get the next level to what gear you have, right? So even though the gear that's present in a pre-existing space might not be the bee's knees, you can at least move up a level in technology, right? So yes, you could piecemeal. That's going to save you the most money. It's not going to help you meet goal number one. But what it will do is provide you with the option to level up to the at least next level. It doesn't have to be the absolute best, which I'm kind of foreshadowing to my best, better, good concept that we're going to hit here shortly. So keep that in mind too, right? Okay, 3 and 4, these guys, though they may be true in some very isolated instances, it's not the majority of thought. We wouldn't even have the university if this was the majority of thought. So I highly encourage whoever might be saying this to you that this mindset is to think that we're always working, they're always working for somebody, whether that's in the back of their head or not. So if somebody are coming to you and saying this, I would recommend that you encourage them that we're working for the most important client, and that's always every client, right? So the client you're working for right now is your most important client. The next client that you're working for next, that's your most important client, right? So in other words, if they're thinking that we don't have to build the best education environment, or we don't have to install the medium or next level piece of gear because the end user isn't really caring, there's room to grow there for sure. So as I mentioned, I would love to hear more of your misconceptions in the chat, and hopefully if we have time at the end to talk about them, I would love to. If not, I can just look at them later and be enthralled with your insight. Okay, with that, let's get on to goal number 2. So delivery is goal number 2. Let's talk about our client, the professor, and for the moment, what are those activities that support our professor? So we technically have 2 clients in this example, right? We have teacher and student. Technically, we have 3 with content, but we'll skip that for now. Our activities to support the professor. So again, to clarify, education is goal number 1. They need to challenge and inform and test. So what do they need to do that? Well, they need managed lectures with presentation aids, possibly objects of demonstration, going back to that kinesthetic mindset. They also need to be clearly heard and clearly seen to all, so hybrid and in person. And not just them, but their material. So if they're holding up an object to showcase a lesson, then that object needs to also be seen in the room and to whoever's listening to virtually, right? And they also need to be physically comfortable in the space. So as a fellow teacher myself, I kind of have a routine when I come up to the front of the classroom, and I need to make sure I have a leaning device that's not a wall, like a chair or something. And I want something to be able to set my laptop on. I use my laptop as a source of material and so on. So they need to be able to do comfortably for what is for them. And that's where we kind of have to bring this back around to how do we find out how they need to be in the best environment for them to deliver their information. Now let's look at our student client. Not only are they in the same or similar environment, either in the actual physical classroom or in a different part of the campus, maybe in their dorm or a library listening in, or the instructor is at their house and the students are in the campus, whichever scenario you have, the activities to support the goal are still for the student being able to hear the professor, being able to see the professor and the materials, sitting comfortably, taking notes, and assessing the material if it's posted online. So being able to, again, be physically comfortable and present. If the room's too cold, they're going to freeze and leave. If the text is too small on the screen, they're going to disengage. If the audio is gurgled or delayed, that's going to impede their ability to take in the message, like what happened to me when I was in 4th grade. I would even add that on both of these clients, that we would need to consider the basics of collaboration. So point-to-point conversation, right? Student unmutes, talks to teacher, teacher is able to talk to the students in the room and also those that are virtual. So we also need to consider the different versions of hybrid education spaces when we consider this delivery method. Okay, so we understand that those are the ways that we're going to assist the goal. And that then leads us to the verb of the how. Okay, so what in the world do I mean by that? How are we going to do the things that I just mentioned? How are we going to help the professor be heard and be clearly seen, and they're going to be sitting comfortably or standing comfortably to teach their material? How is the student going to hear the professor, see the professor, sit comfortably and take notes? Well, what you see here, right? Here's an example. Tables, chairs, notepads, collaborative space, a way to access material, front of the room, board screen, a way to see the students, a way to connect with each student individually. As, again, a teacher myself, I like to have a way to write out the object of the lesson to the students and they can see what I'm writing. So some examples of things that would support that could be, say, a doc cam or a whiteboard or blackboard or a table in front of me with all of my props that I can pick up and talk about, or notebooks and so on. So the point of delivery here is what items, what things can we do to accomplish the previous point of activity of being heard, being seen, delivering the message, right? So in other words, we're at like step 3 now. We understood what the goal is. We understood what action items are involved in that. And now we're talking about what things that we need to support that how. So tables, chairs, front of room, etc. Now, drum roll, we finally get to talk about the technology. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for her to finally get to this point. Well, we're kind of half there. We're not totally there because remember, this is a 3-part series. So what do we get to do now that we understand why we're moving in the direction we're moving? So the first thing, again, we don't want to just spec 150 projectors because we can. We don't want to say, classroom A, you get a projector, you get a projector, you get a projector. Like, we don't need that. We need to be able to think about what they actually need for that space. So again, keep that number 1 goal in mind. We cannot forget the entire reason we're designing and speccing this gear is to solve the equation of what and how our clients can accomplish the goal. So my next webinar, I'm going to talk about where we will be in our different education spaces and more specific types of gear that can be used to support all of these activities. For instance, I kind of alluded to blackboards and doc cams and, kind of things that can be used, but maybe how can we look at those in a more combined experience, right? Is it possible to have a broadcast quality background and be present in a home office with one of our products? It is. And is that going to fit properly in your space? So I teased you a little bit about the best, better, good concept, and it's actually quite simple. Whichever gear you do spec for your educational clients to meet all of these goals that we just set, is there has to be a point in the conversation to ensure them that they not only have their interest in mind, but you have several options available to accomplish their goal. I had a really fun conversation yesterday. Not yesterday. I don't even know what yesterday was. Last week, I had a really fun conversation with somebody who happened to be interested in looking to broadcast a debate panel. So it was a debate panel, and there was a little bit of an audience and a little bit of a panel. And he was like, how do I get all these people on camera? I love those questions. Please contact me more with more of those questions because they just make my day. One of his outcomes that he needed was the output of the stream. The output of the production needed to stream, but also be recorded. And there was going to be people joining virtually, so people debating virtually. And after our conversation and some of the specifications review of our camera lineup, we came with a best, better, good option. So for instance, the best option was going to be 1 BRCX 1000, 3 BRCX 400s, and a few 55-inch Bravia monitors. So that was like the best option, right? And then the middle option was, okay, if they didn't want to either go with that much image quality, or they didn't want to go with that much price range, or they didn't want to give that much attention to the people that were joining virtually, the better option could be 4 BRCX 400s, a projector and a screen. The very last option, or I should say the good option, is 2 SRGX 120s and 2 SRGX B25s, and just the audio feed from the virtual people. So if you have the place to consider, the best, better, good, and your client is willing to hear your options, I definitely recommend that. Even if you just do it for your own edification of finding out what you want to do for this client. So in all, we're accomplishing the goal just in 3 different ways. And ultimately, it's up to you and the client to determine what's best for that space. Okay. Last but not least, and then I'll get out of your hair, I promise. So something that I could spend a very, very long time talking about is production value. It is the thing behind what makes something good or bad. For instance, you've watched good movies and you've watched bad movies. You've been on webinars where it was very good visually, audibly, contently wise, and then you've been on webinars where it was so awful you couldn't believe you stayed tuned in for that long. Now it's the norm that people don't know how to unmute themselves. Not sure why that's a norm. It shouldn't be, right? So what do I mean by production value, and what are the pros and cons? So hang on with me for a little bit longer, and then I'll let you go. People expect a certain level of quality in both giving information and receiving information, especially when it's digital, especially when we're looking at a screen and the screen is looking back at us. So what do I mean by this? Use the example of when you check into a hotel. Okay. For the first time, you kind of come in with a few expectations from the booking site, maybe word of mouth recommendation. But when you actually walk in that door, there is a subconscious standard that's running through your mind that if something doesn't meet par, you're automatically going to start thinking, this is going to be the worst hotel stay ever. Like I had that recently where I was like, this is not what I think I should be enjoying. So there's definitely a subconscious kind of murmur that has me very high standards of hotels. That's what I do for a living. So of course I like to be in a clean hotel. For instance, if the hotel smells funny, I'm going to think that it's probably not going to be a great stay. So how on earth does that analogy apply to outfitting educational space? Way more than you can even imagine. I like to utilize the cell phone a lot for this analogy because this is the device that is with everybody all the time. And regardless, whatever the word is I'm looking for, no matter what they think, whether they're on social media, whether they're on an app on their phone, whether they're on their email, they're taking in information. Some of that might be learning. How are they taking that information in? People who create visual content weigh all of this heavily with every inch of the pixel. So in the broadcast world, you see what's called a bust shot, which is actually probably somewhat what you have of me right now. And that's going to be, shoulders, head, a little bit of headroom. This framing that you're seeing is saying to you that I'm giving you information that I really want you to take away with, right? So body language wise, I'm engaged with you. If I'm over here looking at you like this, like, hey, there's this really cool stuff about AV that I think you should know, not as engaging. So production value is how you're going to develop the product that the student is ingesting on the far end of this in their dorm, and how they're receiving that. So the technology that you put in that space is way more than just throw up a projector and hope the teacher knows how to teach. You're giving them an educational experience. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. Our product line conversation is next Tuesday or next whenever, 15th, I think, on how you can see how our Sony products can help deliver that value to the other end. And guess what? Not just for the student, but also the professor, because the professor now can you imagine how stressed out those people are? They now have to teach their already confusing information to the student through digital means. So it's your job to pay attention to production value. I want to give another example real quick before I end. Think about when you're going face to face with somebody. Again, going back to that serious conversation versus that profile, and how students expect that production value. They come to class. The students walk into the classroom with a set subconscious expectation of how they're going to or want to receive the information. And if they don't get it that way, they leave with half the message delivered, if at all. And same goes for the teachers. The teacher walks into that space expecting to deliver a message in a certain way. You better hope that technology supports the way that they're going to deliver that message. Otherwise, they're not going to feel that they properly educated the students in whatever the lesson was for the day. So we're walking in with two sets of subconscious expectations to manage with our support technology. So when we do talk about actual gear, we're going to keep all of this in mind. I want to give you an example of the pros and cons of production value. One is definitely budget. Two is definitely people that know how to present. So if you have teachers who are maybe not as good presenters, you're going to have to lean on technology a little bit more to get that message across. A good example is professors that like to write on whiteboards with content that is an inch big. Like, how are you going to put that on camera, and how are you going to get that to the students virtually? Well, we have a solution for that I want to talk about. We still have to think about and consider small writing professors. What about professors that don't like to have a camera even in the classroom? How are we going to get their face on the hybrid environment of the students? So lots of fun questions to think about. Those are for next time. Some cons. So really, in my opinion, it's just weighing the benefits of the production value. You always start with the best, better, good, but then you're also considering, hey, if we have a couple extra funding in the budget, like, we would really like to have one of these edge devices in here that can do this thing, because this would make our presentation of the material that much more engaging for the students. Or I have lots of examples. I'll save that for next time. Okay. Quick challenge, and then I'm done talking, I promise. To better understand this concept of production value, I challenge you. Go home, watch your favorite movie without audio. Then week or two later, watch your favorite movie without viewing the screen, so just the audio. And the exercise that you're going to do with this is, what does your brain ask for when it cannot hear the movie? And then what is your brain asking for when it can't see the movie? And when you find those answers, that's going to be your key to bringing your system evaluations and your design to the next level for your client. Hopefully I didn't bore you to death. I'm going to hand it back over to John here for our questions and answer. And it was really fun talking with you guys.
Hey, thanks, Chrissy. That was great. We're looking forward to our future parts 2 and 3 in this series. And we've got a couple of questions, actually several questions here in the chat. Thanks to everyone who's contributed a question or a thought. And there's still time to get in questions if you've got any others. The first one, I guess we'll take the first one from, let's see, we've got David in here. We've got, hold on. Okay, here we go. Now my mouse is working. We've got one from Brian. Brian, I think, Chrissy, this will resonate with you. He says, you can have the nicest, most expensive projectors installed, but when the instructor is just showing a 4x3 PowerPoint, it's not learning. And I think that's probably a challenge that we've all encountered and have to overcome. And we'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that reminds me of the struggle that I have when I was helping commission some systems, and I still ran into VGA. Like literally, my spine cringed when I saw this, because we have those options to put these amazing projectors, these amazing cameras, raising the production value, and the instructor still comes in with a DVD, right? And I think that's a really great gap to talk about. And I'm not sure how to bridge that gap yet, because clearly there needs to be some conversation with the actual professors and teachers of helping them understand that there is such thing as 16:9 and what that could look like, right? And the easiest way that I always talk about it is football versus orange, right? Am I stretching my content, or am I stretching it, or the opposite of stretch? And it's a hard gap to fill, for sure. I think that would be a really fun conversation to have among other AV managers that could be maybe on a panel, because one gap that I knew that existed from fixed install LED was end user to purse string holder people. They didn't understand the day-to-day operation of the actual wall that they were buying. So then a lot of times the wrong thing was either bought, or there was another gap of how do we use the thing that we just bought. So that would be a really great, important conversation to have with university staff. Like, hey, welcome to 2021. 16:9 exists and we need to use it.
Agree. And I think we both know, you and I, Chrissy, both know, and many in the industry who've been pupils of Professor Braun know that it really all starts with the content, right? So good point.
Just to add to that real quick,
yeah,
the part that I mentioned about how, like, when to use an edge, or could we, the professor that writes on the board like 1 inch big, there's settings in the edge that can accommodate for something like that, but it's still compromising the output because the professor's material is this big, right? So we have to kind of accommodate those things as best as we can, knowing that we're going to run into those pain points. And I'd love to hear more pain points if you guys think about them. So
great. Yeah, and thanks. And I think it's a great idea to maybe in one of the future sessions, get some folks from the education arena to have a panel. I think that would be fantastic.
Gosh,
Next
I would
question
so
up is Yeah. Next question up from David. This is a great question, David. He's asking about the pandemic funding program and if there is still funding remaining. And the good news, David, is that we've got two areas on our website where we have links to our education information, as well as links through our site to the CARES Act. So we're going to post those right now in the chat, David. And if you can grab those two, www.ed.gov. And then there's the pro.sony/UE US education solutions. But those are in the chat. Don't try to write them down as I say them. They're in the chat. Go ahead and grab them, and you can find lots more information at both of those locations. So thank you. That's a good question. I'm sure it's one that's on many of our viewers' minds. Let's see what else we've got here. Yeah. Okay. This one's from Khalifa, and he asks, "We don't get to talk directly to professors. How do we
Right.
really know what they want?"
That's a really great question, and I'm so glad you asked it. So the kind of behind the scenes AV world, so to speak, involves people who are either designers or they are um, people who spec gear, right, or have gear to consider. There's also people who do um, box opening videos, they do reviews of products, and many times you will find people in those circles that do have the opportunity to talk to their professors. And so you kind of learn by ear, right? So you go and you connect yourself with people of your similar role with maybe another university, or you get connected into the behind the scenes AV channels that encourage conversation with other AV professionals that are in your same boat. And you can hear, oh, you know what? Math professors really like to use chalkboards, not whiteboards. Okay, now we know this. Another great opportunity that I have been able to do is put yourself in their shoes in some way. So whether you go to a lot of universities have community events, or they have adjunct professors that will teach either a free course or something, some kind of introductory course, and you can put yourself in the shoes of a student, go to one of these events and look and observe and see how the professor walks around the room, see what areas of the room they're making active versus passive, see what direction the students are leaving the room, and actually put yourself in the shoes of a student by engaging in the community of the university. And you're like, I don't have time for this. Nobody's going anywhere right now. Well, you also have more options. You have the YouTube case study environments of different universities. You have different connections with the I don't like to use the word underground, but the behind the scenes tech podcasts. You also have the areas where you can look up white papers on the different pain points and technologies being used to accommodate issues that would be better had if you could sit down and talk to a professor over a cup of coffee. But sometimes that's not an option for everyone. So yeah, definitely look at some of those options if you need a place to start. The Twitter web verse is a great place to start, and I can tell you more about that offline if you need.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, we've got another question here. This is from Grace. And Grace says she likes the perspective of thinking whole AV solution. And she says here that rather than, looking at it as a whole AV solution rather than just replacing gear,
Yeah.
what do you recommend How do you stay on top of the latest offerings?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's very key to your ability to understand what's out there for your client. And a lot of what I just said about getting to know the environment without actually being able to talk directly to the end user. So get on the interwebs, get connected into those behind the scenes AV tech environments, and try to pinpoint one way that I do it is I understand signal flow, and each area of that technology has its own manufacturer, has its own areas of technology that support the final goal, which is to get signal from one point to the other. So I am tuned into newsletters or updated email blasts from certain manufacturers for some of those technologies so that I know what's hot in my niche of technology, which would be signal flow in this example. So, for instance, if you know that you're looking at PTZ auto tracking or some type of camera technology that you want to be able to stay on top of what's out there, start finding out who those manufacturers are, get connected on their email blast, and then you'll see some of those new products that are coming out and some of those new technologies. Thankfully, we have a pretty solid review. I don't even know what you want to call them, culture of our technology. For instance, I just read about a product release for a company, and in the article, not only was there a quick couple blurbs of what the product does, but then there were quick couple blurbs of the tech behind it, right? So how many ins, how many outs, max resolution, price point, and just some real quick introduction to the product, which would then lead you to want to go look at it more if that's a thing. But at least something to seed your mind so that when you're on your next call with your client or your AV designer or whoever you're going to be on the call with, you can be like, hey, I just heard about this one thing. Let me do more research on it and get back to you because now I have a use case to explore more. So yeah, that could be a way.
Great, great. Got another follow-up question from David. This is a good one. He asks, with so much emphasis now on each student in the classroom or remote having their own Zoom-enabled screen, do you think there's going to be less emphasis in the classroom on bigger interactive digital screens where the teacher drives interaction? Um,
Hmm.
or do you see a move to a more bigger smart digital whiteboards in the classroom to bring even more digital sources, including video cameras, live video, etc.?
It's a great question, and I think um, where we're going to start with that is, to be honest, and this is again putting responsibility on the teacher. They have had tools to teach before. They've just been different. So once the teacher begins to get more comfortable with the new tools that are available to them, say a digital whiteboard, say a camera, say a doc cam, whatever, then they're going to assume that that's going to be present in a classroom. For instance, I assume what's going to be present in a classroom is a desk and a doc cam and an HDMI port into the projector. Like, for whatever reason in my head, that's what I expect. And so I think that there's going to be some of those technologies that are available that are eventually going to become, in their minds, standard into a classroom. And if it's not digital whiteboards becoming that standard, it's definitely going to have to be something that can digitalize the space that's happening in the front of the room. So if it is a professor that has a desk full of props, like how I have, some of the XLRs, multimeter, like stuff in front of me that I'm going to use to show, maybe shooting a camera right down at that is where we're at. That's a good question, and definitely something worth more conversation about. I like the idea of digital whiteboards. I think that it goes down to being able to present that as a viable option, because there are professors that are thinking their students are getting what they're seeing, but they're not actually getting what they're seeing because they're not using the tool properly. So I guess in a vague way, it could be that, but whatever it is, the tool has to be taught to the professors to become part of their repertoire, their toolkit.
Got it. Thanks, Chrissy. There are a couple of actually Brian had pinged us here in a follow up, and Brian, we will get to you post post webinar. As everyone knows, when you register, we capture your information. So, Brian, I see your request, and we'll get back to you post webinar. And Chrissy, one last question from Linda. She's asking, she doesn't really understand what you meant by the verb of the how. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes. So remember how I mentioned earlier of the overall goal that is present. So for instance, what is the point of a classroom? The point of a classroom is to help the student and the teacher collaborate on information, the student to be challenged, the teacher to do the challenging. That's the goal. The goal is not put a projector up. The goal is to accomplish that, which is informing, challenging, and testing, and so whatever I mentioned earlier, right? That's the goal. So then the activities to do that is manage lecture, props, listening and hearing and understanding. So the how of accomplishing that is what the how is. How then are we going to accomplish the how? What are the verbs of the how? Well, we're going to allow them to be comfortable and to be seated with tables and chairs and a whiteboard and a camera system in order to showcase their faces on a virtual experience. And then down at the very bottom, which is next webinar, is, okay, you said camera system. Let's start talking cameras. Let's start talking what we actually need to get on that output. So hopefully that cleared that up a little bit. If not, reach out to me after this webinar, chrissy.sarah@sony.com, and we can talk more about what I mean by that.
Thanks, Chrissy. So we're right at about time, and we appreciate everyone's time as always. We appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions and insightful comments. Please keep them coming. Let's keep the let's keep the dialogue going even after the webinar. As Chrissy said, feel free to reach out to her. And with that, I'd like to remind everyone that our next Tech Tuesday webinar will be in 2 weeks on February the 15th. And we're going to jump into a different topic in the next one. And that'll be display solutions for every application. And then the one after that will be back for the second in this series of education-based technology webinars. So with that, again, I wish everyone a very safe and healthy rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you on the 15th. Thanks, everyone.